why shameless? And actually, the whole concept of shame or shameless originated from fearless. So we were hoping that we would have the ability to inspire people to fear less. But then as we were discussing and talking, we realized that it's not actually the fear of fear itself, but rather the fear of shame. And so what we're trying to tap into is we want to empower people to be shameless, to not carry the shame of making a decision or a bad decision, or carrying any vulnerabilities that they might actually be afraid to show the world, and even more so, to drive a higher self-esteem as they work on the inner self, work on others, and work to deliver results.
Welcome to Shameless. Here we explore the transformative power of courage and action.
Hi, I'm Zigamaidi Reddy.
Hi, I'm Nono Bukiti, and welcome to this week of Shameless. That's why this podcast is going to be talking about low self-esteem. Now, I want to just quickly give people a definition of low self-esteem, and then we will go through some examples of signs of low self-esteem. Low self-esteem, according to my very favorite source, WebMD, and no, I do not have shares there. Low self-esteem is when someone lacks confidence about who they are and what they can do. They often feel incompetent, unloved, or inadequate. People who struggle with low self-esteem are constantly afraid of making mistakes or letting people down. Having self-esteem issues can be detrimental to your health and negatively affect your personal and professional relationships. Now, as a transformation leader, this is extremely important because you are empowering and inspiring people. You can't do that if you have low self-esteem. There are many reasons why you may have low self-esteem. Some are actually genetic. It's in your genes, how you were brought up, and other life circumstances can play a role. And the major factors of low self-esteem, however, do come from our own mental state. And if you remember the very first episode that we did, we talked about what?
Your inner voice and your mindset.
Exactly. So that mindset thing is really important because it's constantly going to be ensuring that you have the right thought process. And what are you telling yourself, right? Are you telling yourself things positively, or are you succumbing to negative things?
So, just to catch you there, surely I have moments where I can have low self-esteem and then moments where I can feel very confident. And surely that's not a bad thing.
We all have doubt, but I would say that low self-esteem stems from lack of confidence and maybe prolonged things, right? So I don't think there's anything wrong with being scared in terms of doing something new and maybe feeling a little insecure of if you're going to perform well or not. But then do you do it, or do you struggle to actually do anything?
Because
Because of your low self-esteem.
okay, so it's almost being crippled by the idea that you're not necessarily worthy of something.
I would say that. In your experience, can you tell when someone has low self-esteem?
So I think that any signs that of somebody having low self-esteem for me is when an individual does not back themselves, when they do not have the confidence in or conviction in something either that they know or they're trying to sort of explain. Even further than that is that when people react very strongly to any criticism, so they're hypersensitive to criticism, you start to wonder, where is this originating from? How is this this aspect that is not so great being blown into a situation like this? Somebody who withdraws socially in a space, and you find yourself trying to constantly bring them into a conversation, and they might not necessarily feel like they see themselves with the value that I might see them.
Question around that social withdrawal then. How do we know it's the difference between someone who's introverted and doesn't necessarily gain energy for spending time with many people versus it being an indicator or a marker or precursor to low self-esteem?
So I think that is a very interesting one. I believe that somebody who has ideas, who have thoughts, and actually might actually even want to be in the conversation, they tend to, they can withdraw or exclude themselves as a function of actually not feeling that their contribution is worth it. And so I think there's a very thin line between those two. But if you believe that your comments are not worthy to actually be within the conversation, then my thought is, what are you feeding yourself? Are you feeding yourself with negativity, or are you actually driving yourself in the right direction to actually be able to contribute in a meaningful way? And I think somebody who's more introverted might not want to talk, but they're not necessarily feeding themselves negative stuff. But somebody who has low self-esteem will not talk because they actually don't feel like they're worthy.
So that probably then reinforces any negative perceptions that they have from themselves. Likely leads to things like depression, probably enhances your anxiety that you may or may not already have.
Yes, however, I would like to take the spin to make it a bit more positive. Because I actually think that though an individual might be in moments or even in prolonged spaces suffer from low self-esteem, the first step is actually realizing that they are feeding themselves this fuel and this cycle. And at the end of the day, this cycle of anxiety that they might feel is actually originating from something a bit deep-seated that they could actually work on, reinforce the more positive mindset to actually get them to a space where they can actually overcome that heavy feeling.
Definitely being able to understand that you may be in that rut of low self-esteem, you're saying, is like step one in that process. But what other indicators of someone having low self-esteem? Because I have been in situations where someone just lashes out in a way that I think is socially too wide, if that makes sense. And I think it was last month we spoke about social intelligence and the aspects of, understanding how that culture goes there. So in the cultural context of what we define in our cultural norms, the lash out just seems a little bit too crazy, especially if you were to give them constructive criticism. And I've also noticed that certain cultures do not do well with feedback. So is that low self-esteem? Was that just cultural
context?
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think we can talk about all of these things in a lot of detail and the nuances across culture versus self-esteem versus introversion. And in the end of the day, the whole notion, at least for me, is we all need to be striving to see the better in others and then being able to support others through a different space that they might be in. And that means, how do we fuel somebody else's light, and how do we fuel our own light? And I do believe that the cultural aspect does play a large role. As you mentioned earlier, your upbringing plays a large role in the way in which you view life. But that doesn't mean that that's the only way to view life. And so at the end of the day, if we're able to build that resilience of mind, that presence of mind, that understanding, and also be able to accept criticism, accept comments or any inputs, then one of the main aspects of being able to accept actually is to have and to build that resilience and self-esteem. So if you find yourself being offended by somebody lashing out or criticizing you, then start to ask yourself the question, why am I actually feeling this way? Am I feeling this way because it is warranted, or is it because I am more so internalizing certain aspects and drawing upon self-esteem and negative comments as opposed to building from what they've said and making it more into a constructive space?
Yeah, like I definitely agree with that. This topic of low self esteem is quite important because there are actual physical symptoms that come up with low self esteem that lead to mental and physical health issues like depression, anxiety, anorexia. It can also lead to unhealthy habits like tobacco, alcohol abuse, or drug use. And then you become an addict. And that's probably the extreme cases of low self esteem. But if you find yourself falling in those brackets, there's nothing wrong in seeking professional help. Inversely, we'd want to give you guys some pointers on how you might deal with low self-esteem if you find yourself having that. And you've mentioned a couple of good nuggets around how we can deal with that.
I try to do put in those nuggets in once in a while. I mean, joking about nuggets, we didn't have a quote for today's episode. So I'm gonna make a little pause in this session, and I'd like for you to give us a quote that's sort of, I don't know, inspirational.
Okay, that is a lot on pressure.
Pressure.
But the quote for this episode, which I absolutely forgot to say, is life will knock you down more than you can imagine. Don't knock yourself down. And I think that's really about that kindness, that inner voice concept, speak to yourself kindly. And I don't even think that it's a situation that only stems from low self-esteem. Like speaking from my own personal experience, I think I'm quite tough on myself. And every morning I literally have to wake up and go, be kind to yourself today. Be gentle, be warm. Don't be so critical of yourself. And I don't look at it as a low self-esteem thing. I think it's an unrealistic perfectionism thing in my mind that I need to just let go. And there are days that are better than others. There's some days when I'm loving to myself. Weeks. And then next days I'm not so much, I'm not that nice. So I really think that that's really important to just don't knock yourself down. You are living in this crazy world that has a lot of negativity in it in some spaces. And even though in this space you try to give a little bit of light, it doesn't mean that once you finish listening to this, there's going to be light where you're going.
I absolutely love that. Life will knock you down more than you can imagine. Don't knock yourself down. And it's like, the actual thing that reminded me of was, I had to go up and give a speech. And it was a speech as part of me coordinating a program at work. And there were a whole bunch of different people, CEO and a whole bunch of different people on there. And I went forward and I started talking, and as I was coordinating the actual conversation, I could feel myself really crashing in that conversation. It was, in my mind, it was horrible. I felt it was horrible. I still think it was horrible. And the reality of it all was, after I got off that call and I was listening back to myself, I felt so bad. And I kept bashing myself over and over again. And it didn't give me any confidence, any ability to rise beyond that. And even what it did actually, it helped me retract. And so I actually didn't want to be in a session where I had to read a bunch of notes as well as present. And that took away my ability to then grow in that space. Life is tough as it is. And if you aren't your biggest cheerleader, you will find that you will retract away from the opportunity for growth. And that instance where I was doing that program, coordinating it, and I really tanked that presentation. Yeah, that was a deep moment for me. And really, I do think I lost out like several years as a function of, because I never actually came back to actually do that. I ran away from any opportunity that presented itself for me to be able to talk in front of people in that same setup or that same layout. And I think I took more from myself than the world actually took from me. I actually put those barriers, the ones that were to come. and life is tough. So if I don't take every opportunity and I limit the opportunities that are available to me, how do I grow? Where do I grow from that point? There's no reason for you to be looking at me with those crazy eyes.
What? I'm gonna tell you, every time that we do a podcast, I swear I like such new things about you. And like part of me, this is full disclosure, part of me will be like at the end of the podcast be like, so that story wasn't like a real story, it wasn't just like a story you're just trying to like tell people. It's like they're a real story.
You were there when this happened.
When?
It was there. We were sitting at that in a cubicle, and I was doing a presentation just before we went somewhere, and I was just tanking it, and I absolutely tanked it.
I don't remember. But you know what? Like, let me give you guys a trick. It might not be on this, but it's my personal trick. Okay? I believe that it's very good to be self-aware and to learn from your mistakes. But I can promise you, like, if there's a crazy thing that happened to me, I won't even remember it like a year, like, you know, like a while. I'll just be like, no, that wasn't that bad. I think that was actually great. Like, I didn't like the delusion. The slight delusion of that might soften the fear of, okay, let me try again, because you're just going, oh no, that was just a mistake. My writing wasn't working, or I didn't have enough sleep, or whatever the excuses. So that's
So you just delude yourself, essentially. That's
Just
your
it-
advice?
my advice is do whatever it takes to say yes, and do whatever it takes to open those doors. Do whatever it takes to be in those rooms. Whatever you need to do in your mind, whether it's trick yourself, lie to yourself, speak up for yourself, do those things.
Very strong.
Okay, all right. So dealing with low self-esteem, can you overcome low self-esteem? And the answer is
Yeah. Hell yeah.
goodness, right? But there are a couple of tricks that you probably need to apply. Maybe tricks is not the word, but like mechanisms that you can use. One is identifying the troubling conditions or situations that deflate your self-esteem. So, for example, you gave a great example of giving a work presentation and dealing with the fact that, okay, I felt like it was terrible. Now, we have that fearless exercise. And one of the aspects of fearless is that you should identify what that fear is. Then you ask yourself, well, and then what? And then what?
What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, because in reality, the worst that can happen is probably feeling shame. And you want to
It's just a bit of shit.
a bit of shame. And then maybe people will laugh at you. And then, okay, you're still going to work tomorrow. You're still going to like live, right?
They'll probably forget it by the time they're eating lunch. Right?
Exactly, because the way social media is, somebody in the States will be doing something wild.
And also because nobody really cares.
No one's watching and nobody cares.
Indeed.
Yeah. Other things that you could do is you can become aware of your thoughts and beliefs, which is what I basically talked about earlier on, right? But this is you identifying the times in your life where you felt like you had low self-esteem. Because you will, I don't think there's anybody that I've met that hasn't had aspects or bouts of low self-esteem. You want to evaluate those thoughts and then interpret what happened. That way you can see, okay, are my thoughts positive? Are they negative? Are they neutral? Are they based on facts? Are they irrational? And there's nothing wrong with bouncing off with a confidant or someone that you respect, or even a paid professional, to just give you an equal balance of, no, that's too negative, or yeah, that's not that great, but we can work on it.
Yeah. And you know, just to touch on that one, I think that ability to really play back situations, play back circumstances is incredibly important, because you can really build your reasoning and understanding of yourself, and you can just hold yourself to a better account. If you are having negative thoughts, then you say, I'm not doing this right. I am looking at this in a negative way, and I need to find ways to turn it over. And that, to me, really is about challenging negative or inaccurate thoughts. And in fact, it is important to ask yourself whether your thoughts are consistent with fact or logic.
Yeah.
And sometimes we find ourselves really trapped in a cycle where it's not necessarily even logical, and we then go, this is an emotional feeling. But really, the emotional feeling has got no basis to exist and no basis to then drag you down. And then, there could be other reasons or explanations for situations that is truer than your own interpretation. You might actually find something that is actually more correct or makes more sense. And in a space like that, then you find yourself you should really challenge your thought process and that negative input that you're having.
I would just like to add on that, because I think that's really true about, the situation. You might find that the situation is truer than your interpretation. If you're finding yourself feeling like you have low self-esteem because of someone's actions towards you, there's nothing wrong with going up to that person to clarify. Because sometimes in your mind, you might go, this person has given me this task or this role, and I thought I was this. And meanwhile, the person, they're thinking like, oh, this is a great opportunity. You was in your mind building like the craziest story because you're the next J.K. Rowling. Like, I think it's really, yeah, like get those explanations, yeah.
And it's so crazy because there was a period in time where I really thought what my biggest calling at work was to really build and grow individuals. And that growth and that building meant that I needed to actually let people be free, let people make their own decisions, and eventually let people even leave the space that we're working in and actually go and work somewhere else. And when somebody talked back to me on that, they were like, well, we feel like you don't care and you don't actually want us to be part of your team. And I thought to myself, why didn't you ever ask me? And in the end, all it took was that small conversation of, well, so why is it that you want us to be so independent? And I'm like, well, because if you're independent, then you grow. If you grow, that's good for you. And rather than looking at it as something negative, the reality was just a small conversation. I think it was easy to turn that to.
That's actually true. And I think that is around adjusting that mindset piece.
Yeah.
Because it's how you frame that.
Yeah. You need to find opportunities to identify moments where you've felt a blow of your own self-esteem. And then to become self-aware about how and why you have those thoughts and feelings towards those events. And if you're able to identify those things, then now you can take a step back, analyze those thoughts and emotions, and now you have the power to change your thoughts and patterns to raise that self-esteem. In the end of the day, the first part is to be able to identify, to then be able to comprehend why those thoughts are coming to light. And then now you've got the power within your own hands to actually make the next steps and the necessary steps to adjust that whole mindset and the whole process.
Because no one is perfect and everyone makes mistakes. It doesn't make you a bad person, it just makes you human. This podcast is brought to you by Transformation Leader. You can follow us at www.t4leader.com.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share as we embark on our mission to impact 1 million African lives by 2026.